chat is getting really antsy that I'm playing the same music that I always play. We're live, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Chris, but everybody calls me Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar and Sobekra Infidel.
I'm Chris Franzen, occasionally known as Mojo, until I mysteriously disappeared. But I'm back.
I'm James, also known as Aramithius.
And I'm Tabitha, also known as Slode or Antwaifu.
And once again, as I mentioned the last time Tabs was with us, that's the Slode that everybody likes, not the Slode that's been banned from everywhere. So today we're talking about... That's a really, really old school Elder Scrolls lore joke. I'm sorry. That's many years old. So today we're talking about Nordic culture. Mostly because we've just decided to start running through every culture we can get our hands on, one by one, until we run out, and then we'll find something else to do. And it's particularly relevant because, among other things, the last Elder Scrolls game that was released was Elder Scrolls Online. Let me back that up. The last Elder Scrolls single-player game that was released was Skyrim. So everybody's got a pretty good grip on how relevant Nords are to the universe in general. Yes, Nords have culture, Reg. Jesus Christ. So that's racist. So and it's also particularly relevant because everybody's thinking about the new God of War game that just came out today, which is Nordic for some reason. I haven't gotten to the part of the game where they explain that bit yet. Because it's the same freaking character. Anyway,
he just left. That's all.
Yeah.
There's no big, lore story about it.
I suspect that's exactly. Yeah, it's probably not any more involved in that. I got
fuck
bored,
Grease.
got killed everybody. I killed everybody, and I left. Does anybody have a place they want to start? Who wants to kick us off?
Well, should we start kind of surface level and then go deeper into the proverbial rabbit hole until we hit like spaceships and people who turn into dragons?
Start with the Nordic pantheon because that feeds into a lot of other topics that we wanted to talk about.
True enough.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, how do the Nords believe the universe was created?
Let's start with the simple stuff.
They have no creation myth, and I feel like
isn't that weird?
The reason for that is something I think we can get into farther down said proverbial rabbit hole. But there is a good reason for it, I promise.
But no, in terms of the cosmology, Nords, how they've gone through a fair amount of cultural evolution, which is good in its own right. But as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of made them kind of start off kind of cool and interesting long ago, and then got gradually more and more similar towards other stuff, which I remember Kirkbride saying that that's something he was trying to avoid in Elder Scrolls. But in terms of the culture, they seem to, the Pocket Guide to the Empire kind of pitches them as kind of thriving on conflict, having their own set of gods, and being the kind of strong arm of the Empire and humanity. And they kind of their kind of big sell and their kind of big point of pride, I think that we can possibly say, is that them starting off as one of the first, if not the first, big mannish race on Tamriel. The Nords were one of the first to kind of kick back against Mer, and one of the first sets of men to arrive. They're the most mannish man race, as far as I'm concerned.
Most manly men that ever manned. You could say, depending on whose pantheon you're talking about, that the Nords are most directly related to the Wandering Elnifey. So the question about why the Nords don't have a creation myth is very interesting. And so I'm going to read to you now all the text that I have about what may or may not be an unreleased Nordic creation myth that was, I believe, supposed to be added to Oblivion but didn't make it. And the text is incomplete, so I'll read what I have. Way, way in the beginning, back when there was only the Grey Maybe, there was a god that is now referred to as Akatosh. He was not yet called by this name, nor was he the same being he is now generally considered to be. Then he was only the first, and he contained within him all the mysteries of time, past, present, and future. It is when he forms within the Grey Maybe that time begins. Soon other gods follow, among them Arche, Mephala, and others. Some of these gods lean towards the light of order, Anu, others more towards the chaos, Sithis. As time passes, these distinctions grow stronger, and soon the division of Aegir and Daedra is created. Akatosh was drawn to neither. He was time, all-knowing and all-seeing. Distinctions such as order and chaos meant little. Still, he recognized the split that had occurred and realized that time must be represented among both groups. He then divided himself into two aspects: Akatosh, dragon god of time, and Hermaeus Mora, Daedric lord of past, present, and future.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
great. I love that. Where did you find that?
It was, I can't say, but I can tell you that it was going to be released in Oblivion, and then it wasn't for whatever reason.
Okay. I actually had in my notes for this, so much of Nordic culture revolves around them being mortals and them knowing, like, acutely being aware of their mortality. You know, they were like the original story keepers. I mean, Ysgramor was the first one who came up with an alphabet, at least the first man who did. They were the first to be able to interpret dragon scratches as a language. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that it identifies Hermaeus Mora or Hermamora as part of Akatosh, and that it identifies Akatosh within the Nordic pantheon at all, because usually we only hear about Alduin.
Yeah, well, actually, I should also mention, I forgot myself, I got sloppy. I should mention that I don't actually have that labeled definitively as a Nordic creation myth. The reason why I suspect it's a Nordic creation myth is because it places Hermaeus Mora so high up in the pantheon. And Chris, you've duplicated yourself.
Yes.
Did you click on the scroll 3 times and then drop?
Yeah, he's now Momojo. Yeah. And one of the interesting aspects of the Nordic pantheon is how much importance they place on Hermaeus Mora, the old man of the forest. And I like Tabitha that you mentioned how keenly aware they are of their mortality. Because they're also one of the few cultures in Elder Scrolls that has a practical guide, an application on how to get into their equivalency of heaven. And their fascination with their own mortality, they've placed so much emphasis on how you live while you're still alive that it creates a very easy to identify value system and moral code. And it creates in a culture the ability to determine who's going to get their final reward and who isn't. And so it is unfortunately something that's been, I think we'll all agree, has been sort of almost cloned from Viking culture, which is unfortunate. But what makes it interesting is, to me at least, is the way that it lines up against other Elder Scrolls cultures, like the Dunmer, for example, who have no clear definition of what happens after death. As a matter of fact, does anybody know of any Elvish culture that does?
I mean, I know the Dark Elves, and most of the Elven cultures practice their ancestor
worship.
And so, I mean, it's almost implied that it almost becomes like an animism sort of thing. I feel like, where our ancestors become spirits and they're venerated that way. What they do as spirits, we don't really know.
Mhm.
Some of them may protect the family lineage in the tombs or something like that. I mean, but I'd be interested in looking more at how the undead are raised in Dunmary tombs to begin with.
Well,
But
we
that's
also
that's
see
that's a different time.
That's
Yeah.
in like Dunmer culture, we also see the spirits of ancestors being a lot more active, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like making, more decisions, like being able to learn and think almost as if they were still alive, whereas the spirits of men that we see tend to just be more like echoes. Like even like in game, like you will see them just like follow a path that they followed in life. So it's not as if they're still there in the same way.
yeah.
Question.
For-
With Dunmer, was this cut content, or was this Tamriel rebuilt, or was this actually in the game that they also use their spirits to feed the ghost fence?
That's
Yeah.
That was in
actual
there.
Morrowind. Yeah.
Is
Was
that
that okay?
Ancestors in the Dunmer.
okay? I don't remember. Like I actually asked around for a while about that, and I couldn't find because I had it in my head personally that I must have read it somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, I've been wondering
the book-
about that too, and I'm not sure.
The book
All right.
in Ancestors in the Dunmer, it points out that they used to
Oh.
keep the bones of their ancestors for the personal ghost fence at home for advice and all that. But at the point where the book is written, they'd started sending the spirits off to the ghost fence to defend against Dagothera, and if you kept them for your family, you were selfish.
Yeah.
But I think the other, just to go to the original question, the kind of the other Mannish cultures that an afterlife. Do the Red Guards have a how to get to the far shores manual?
How to get
it
there.
implies that there's a technique to do it.
Well,
I mean,
the far shores are being blocked by Sakatal?
By Tall Papa, he wasn't letting people back unless I think it was Tuwaka who taught them a way back using the stars, which is the walkabout. But yeah, that's other cultures. But with
and we've spiraled. You're right. We spiraled right off of
yes, we
Elder
did.
Scrolls Ramblecast again. So and I like the I'm really having a lot of fun in my brain knocking around the idea that the Nords are like emphasize so heavily their own mortality. The more I think about that, the more I like it. Because it's it's sort of like it individualizes Nords from other Mannish cultures in a big way, which I always appreciate. It separates them somewhat from the almost Marish culture of the Red Guard, and the sort of I'm going to be condescending here, the wannabe Marish culture of the Bretons. But that's
Everyone
because
hates
they. I'm sorry.
Everyone hates Bretons.
Well, I certainly do. To be fair, there's a lot more going on there than I give it credit for. But anyway, but the reason why I like the emphasis on mortality in Nordic culture is that it doesn't. The reward, the problem that I have with a culture that emphasizes dying in combat is that it de-emphasizes the importance of survival. And in a culture that it's very important for a culture to survive, that it encourages a very strong survival instinct, because if your people die, your culture dies. And what I like about the approach that Nords take, that they sort of borrowed from real life Vikings, is that it's okay to die. It's not only okay, but it's glorious to die in battle, which gives you culturally a great deal of support for really, really crazy ass warriors. But not that it's okay for you to die anywhere. You see what I mean? Die in a useful way. Don't die because fuck it.
But that also kind of has problems in that it's also, in my opinion, quite responsible for how fractious Nordic culture is. It kind of blame Ysgramor for this in a way, simply because he was someone who disappeared off with his friends and did his own thing and founded a nation, and so it emphasizes personal loyalty in a very, very big way. And if you're not loyal to that particular person, then they're okay to fight, and if you die, it's great. If you die fighting them, then it's great. You've got those two kind of elements that kind of spiral into making this big violent mess, basically.
Right. A big violent mess. Mm-hmm.
Which is what Skyrim has kind of been for a lot of its history. It's one of the things that slightly annoys me about the time that the first pocket guide was written. Because as far as I can tell at that point in history, Skyrim was divided into East and West. And there's no real account given as to how they reunified beyond Tiber steamroll with a lot of them.
Could have been it. Yeah. Tiber reunited a whole lot of people at gunpoint. So,
well, I think that Nords also have a sense of honor. And I mean, they're pretty xenophobic. But things that are almost like themselves, I mean, even giants, they extend a certain amount of respect to and cultural. I mean, Well, we can talk about giants later because that's a whole thing.
Oh, well, but we're kind of trying to approach the origin of Nords in general. I think we should talk about giants. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a bit.
Okay.
I do want to go back to the religion because I think bringing up that the whole, being so fractious, the fact that Nords, since whatever they were before Tamriel appeared, however it happened, they've been at war like that entire time, and we see them move away from that like animalistic worship during that time. And so I think that could have something to do with them like rejecting the dragon cult, like venerating people who look more like themselves and are more like themselves, because they have like Kain is like the personification of the air in their throats, and like they really venerate like what is useful to them.
Yeah, it's kind of, again, going back to it's practical in essence. It's what works for them. It's again another way of securing that cultural survival.
Someone in the chat was talking about Junal and how he got booted out of the Pantheon, and they were going more into like Ysgramor and stuff like that. But I mean, it's kind of similar that high mathematics and stuff like that just didn't serve a purpose for them. So they like what's useful, what they can actually use in their daily lives, and as long as they can count 1, 2, 3, 4, I think that's enough for them. They don't need to know crazy algorithms to try and break the universe, like some other cultures.
Algebra is not useful for counting your cows. Yeah
exactly.
ABCs for barbarians.
Like they know enough to make sure they're not getting fucked over, in a trade deal, and that's it.
So then he tried to tell me, I'm giving you an imaginary number of cows.
It's the number of birds on a tree.
Yeah. The number of birds that can rest on the Timbrel tree. Yes, exactly.
One point where we're still kind of going through the religious side of it, I kind of had a vague theory about death and the Nords and how that relates to their view of dragons and stuff. Because Alduin is both beginning and end for them, in their various ways. But you also think about the way that the Nordic pantheon itself came about and grew from the Totemic stuff into the current Nordic gods. That was the dragon cult. The Totemic stuff was kind of linked to the dragon cult, which is as far as I can see, a kind of cultural trauma, if I can put it that way, for the Nords. There was lots and lots of death, and Alduin made them all die very, very young and all that sort of thing. And so you've got that kind of dragon association with death, which also explains why they're so focused on how they die. It's kind of it's a way of them controlling their own destiny in a sense, rather than having it still controlled by dragons. I kind of vaguely want to shoehorn in something about how they thought that the power of the Thum and Dragonbornness. What words are failing me? Is kind of associated with Talos more than Akatosh. It's again that attempt to kind of reclaim stuff from Alduin, and Talos as the Lord of the Underworld is again something similar to that. They are remaking the thing that defined them at the start, which was death and dragons, into death and themselves, and so on.
Well, isn't the Thum a gift from Kine though?
Yeah, but the gift of being Dragonborn is something else.
Well, yeah. The gift of being a Dragonborn.
Yeah,
but the Thum
that's much more associated with that's not associated with Akatosh, in my memory.
Yeah, which I mean, Kine is I think one of the wives of Shore.
Yes.
Or something, which that relates it back to Talos. So yeah, I just wanted
she's like the wife, you know, like she's important, like extremely in Nordic culture. We see her referenced like pretty much as Shore is, but she is not the thing that makes it happen. She is the breath that makes it happen. You know.
Yeah, no, she's the breath, she's the life and the potential, I think.
Yeah.
Is that a right way to put it? Okay, yeah. So that's
yeah.
We actually talk more about, like, I really want to go back to that association of Hermaeus Mora and Akatosh because and especially with the Dragonborn, I know we have our own thoughts and feelings about how the Dragonborn is treated in game, but I think that associating Hermaeus Mora and Akatosh, who is associated with Alduin, is really interesting because Hermaeus Mora, he is the personification of fate. So what does that say about the Dragonborn? That they are so entwined with this, tentacle fate monster.
What does that say? What does that say about Mirak?
Because there's something that is so you eat the thing to become it, and that we see a lot. I mean, that's Alduin's entire thing. And
true.
Then we always see Hermaeus Mora absorbing knowledge and eating it and pulling things into itself. So I think that those 4 figures are a little bit more entwined than we realize.
Well, there's also the there's a lot of ways to characterize Hermaeus Mora's obsession with knowledge, and it's I get some very interesting ideas in my head when I start sort of stretching the definition to say that Hermaeus Mora does not consume knowledge so much as he consumes culture.
Ooh.
And the idea it's very perceptive, Tabitha, to say that Hermaeus Mora consumes things just like Alduin does, because getting knowledge out of Hermaeus Mora is very, very difficult. And a lot of the stories that people tell about Hermaeus Mora that you can read about, if it's not just Hermaeus Mora being a dick, it's whatever kind of deal you strike with Hermaeus Mora to gain knowledge, the knowledge that you get is almost worse than not having the knowledge at all. It's corrupted somehow. It's definitely it's in that sort of that usual kind of a folk tale of strike a deal with the devil and then you get some kind of really terrible twisted version of what you were looking for. That whole needful things kind of shtick. But it's not that hard to imagine that Hermaeus Mora's intention is to give you more than you is to not give you what you wanted. In other words, to not give you what he has, because because he's eaten it, he's kept it. So you might say therefore that Alduin consumes the physical realm, is kind of worm-headed with this, and Hermaeus Mora consumes the mental realm.
Yeah.
I don't think we really need to separate those things though, because
That's true.
I mean, if we just like think about the term Dragonborn, it doesn't just mean, you know, someone who is naturally able to go around and shout at things and make them move or run really fast or whatever. It means someone who like is an agent of moving time forward. And that breaks the fourth wall a little bit, you know, because you, the player, move things forward. But you know, so I think that just that Hermaeus Mora being tied into fate, like, I mean, you know, I mean, in every other Elder Scrolls game, what happens to the player character at the end of it? Like, is a Dragonborn person just an agent for moving time forward and maybe even bringing about the end of the Kalpa?
Well, I have an idea about Hermaeus Mora in that regard. And this kind of ties into the Marukani selectives a little bit. In that when the tower was danced upon, and Maruk and the others danced upon the tower and removed the elven influence from Akatosh, and he was shattered basically into the three major parts with a bunch of little ones, namely Akatosh, Ariel, and Alduin, right? That Hermaeus Mora kind of came from the extra stuff from that, in the same way that we look at Malakath as a portion of Totemic. While Totemic was split into Zenithar, Stendarr, and Arkay, and Malakath is kind of the leftovers. Hermaeus Mora is the same thing, but for the Akka Oversoul, which it occupies an interesting niche, however you want to pronounce that, for his role in the Arbus. Is he even intentional in terms of what he does? I mean, he has an intention, of course, but when he hoards his knowledge, is that just the leftovers of time that he's collecting? He is a leftover of time in some way.
That strikes me as more something that Mehrunes Dagon would almost do if we were to take the 7 fights of the Eldudaga seriously.
Sure, but but the two of them are linked in the 7 fights.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I mean, I'm just kind of throwing theory out there and seeing where it goes.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the things that's different in the Nordic interpretation of Hermaeus Mora, which is kind of why I was a little disappointed that he was a tentacle-filled void, was that he was the old man of the woods. He was this woodland demon thing which also has some interesting implications for what he was really doing in Atmora, of all places. If you think about the etymology of that, was he a problem for the Nords in Atmora? Was he is there some kind of association you have there with the old man of the woods and the old wood that was Atmora? But I don't know. That's kind of something that I need to pass out a bit more. It's only something that's just occurred to me, but it's just the idea of kind of a woodland demon hopping around. That's not something I'd map to knowledge necessarily, but that's the Nordic presentation of him in at least varieties of faith. I'm not sure if he's got any different, particularly Nordic iterations anywhere else. I can't remember what the design document says in that respect. But
Reg 55,000 suggested that he stole the trees.
I like the suggestion that the tentacles can be seen as serpentine. Hermaeus Mora seems to like Chezarines, and his acolyte calls his Augmentum Finium the heart of a god, which should give some thoughts. Yeah, as that creates a really interesting, you know, if it's the mishmash of leftover bits of serpents / dragons, we end up with weird tentacle kind of
scales.
You know, yeah. I really like that the way that fits in there. And the trees thing. What were we saying about the trees?
Well, I'm still trying to process that, because I do think that there is a connection to be made between the forest, the way Nordic and Germanic cultures think about the forest, especially something like the dark forest, of and how that might play into Atmora being the old forest. Is if you say that if you draw a connection between Atmora and Hermaeus Mora, then is Hermaeus Mora the return of a dark past?
It's possible, although I don't think that. Well, there's one little throwaway line in Varieties of Faith that has bugged me immensely in recent weeks. But there's not much of an explanation that, or not much of a feeling that I get that Atmora was a particularly bad place for the Nords. I mean, yes, they came, they invaded, and they did all they stopped coming here because the place froze over in some many and various interesting ways. But I don't get the sense that it's that much of a bad place. But Varieties of Faith has the kind of line. I can't remember what it's. I think it's in Discussion of Orki. That he had a particular role during Murish rule of Atmora, and it's in those words. We don't think of elves being in Atmora at all, and having that sort of a link. It's very much the home of men. I mean, apart from there's the kind of, is Atmora and Aldmeris the same place?
Right. But do either of them actually exist in the first place? Yeah. Well, it's the cave from, if you want, it could be the cave from the goblin creation myth, It's the place that the Elnophe both came from. And Tabitha's gone sideways again.
Well, wait. Shit. Well, wasn't... God, I can't remember if I'm just making this up in my head or not, but like during the Elnophe War, like, I mean, wasn't Atmora exchanged multiple times throughout the war? Like,
awesome.
Possibly.
I don't remember if we had that much of an account of it. Is there anywhere that gives a kind of a progress of the war beyond people squabbled, the land broke up, and then everyone carried on?
Let me think here.
I don't know, because the only real account of the Elnophe Wars I can really ever remember is the one that's in the Annuad, which is about 3 sentences. But yeah,
that's a head scratcher.
Yeah,
and then the other problems that we have to think about, or do we have to combine the presence of Atmora, the rule of elves, possible rule of elves, and the way that Ysgramor left Atmora for Skyrim? Is what then therefore is the connection between them and giants?
That's a pauser, and particularly if you think, because I know that there are some dev quotes out there, but no real in-game thoughts that that men didn't actually come from Atmora ultimately. I don't know whether that's they were intending that the Nords never came from Atmora in the first place, but there's the idea of men coming from Atmora originally was a myth anyway, and something that wasn't actually the case. I mean, there's what is it? Not Subtropical Cyrodiil. There's the Social History of Cyrodiil, published by some Breton university. That
goddamn, some place where they print your graduation receipt, when they print your
press or something.
Yeah.
That kind of talks about Tamriel being a safety valve for Atmora for generations and that sort of thing. It kind of implies that the Nords and Skyrim are kind of the latecomers in terms of mannish migration onto Tamriel. it also means that they're probably the closest to Atmorans that we get, in the sense of being different from Tamriel, because all the various other cultures will have spent more time on Tamriel, whereas the Nords have actual history in Atmora. So they've got that link. So they are the most alien of men, so to speak. Which is perhaps another reason why they've got a slightly different perspective on things to the way the other cultures work. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. The next step is to kind of think about giants, but I know nothing about them beyond the fact that mammoths may be the female form. I don't know.
Oh, right. That mammoths are female giants.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that one. Yeah.
And I don't even know whether that's just to explain the fact that giants only have male models in game.
Well, we're not allowed to say budget, so.
Well, don't they have them in ESO now?
Yeah, I think they do.
Do they? I don't think I've ever seen a female giant.
Okay.
Then again, I haven't
No,
really looked all that closely. I try to avoid them, but.
Oh.
Filthy creatures.
But yeah, does anyone have any connections between the Nords and giants? I know that there have been some anthropologists who have tried to live among the Nords, that sort of thing. But I know nothing else about where they're actually supposed to have come from.
Well, a big cynical part of me thinks that the Nords spread the rumor that they're descended from giants because they like the idea. You know? That they're just like, yeah, we used to be huge, we're not anymore, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
It's fine. But we used to be a really big deal back in the day, you know.
Ooh. That's again, I'm asking questions that I don't know whether we can answer now. But do we have any indication that whether the giants have a similar totem system to ancient Nordic religion or not?
There were some people speculating about the giant stones with designs painted on them that you see in Skyrim. That this was some kind of a totemic thing. I think other people were speculating that it was actually the giants mapping out their territory, like gang signs almost, big giant gang signs. Instead of throwing their shoes over a power wire or something. It's I don't think that's I don't know where people got that idea from. I think they're both equally likely. There's also the question about whether or not giants have the, if you pardon the expression, but do they have the cultural maturity or complexity to have a religion? I mean, when they wander around Skyrim, they're barely conscious.
I mean, I've always pictured it as a very animistic type. If there is a religious system in place with the giants, it's very animistic.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I mean, with the animism, sure, I agree with that, but whether we can look at them on the surface and say, oh, they have no culture, because the giants are a lot more complicated than we give them credit for. Namely, the fact that I mean, as I understand it, they're directly Elnathay or directly one gradient below Elnathay. And because of that, they're more ephemeral, nebulous kind of beings. So what we can see in the physical realm may not be representative of all that they are. So if we think of them as more of a metaphorical idea rather than physical stomp, blast you into the stratosphere kind of dudes, then I mean there may be more to their culture that's intangible, hard to access, simply by virtue of being what they are. Does that make sense?
That's what you're stepping on.
Yeah.
Nordic space program. That's right. I forgot, Reg. They do have a space program. I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They also like painted cows. I mean, just throwing that out there.
Yep.
And I actually wanted to bring up the painting. Sorry, I disappeared for a minute there. My internet went out. I got a storm coming through. So if you look at their painting in game, it actually highly resembles like early Nordic art.
Oh.
So even if they're not direct ancestors or cousins of the Nords, I think it's possible that they could, you know, have served in some sort of teaching role.
I have never done that. I've never actually studied their painting. Huh.
Teaching,
Yeah,
as in
the patterns that they paint like around their encampments, and if you look at, you know, the same sort of swirly designs that are painted on cows that are given to them and sacrificed by Nords, they're very similar. And then that same style is repeated in Nordic barrows.
Somebody in Jesus, that's really interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
Although the pedant in me says, shouldn't Nordic barrows be a lot bigger if they're the same thing?
Well, no, I mean, I'm not saying that they're the same thing. I'm saying that I
Okay.
think that they have the same cultural roots. And if you look at the book, which one was that? Oh, Giants, a Discourse. It also makes the argument that they have the same cultural origins. And in the book, it says that they're both descended from Atmorans. You know, talks about Atmorans being tall and all of that.
Well,
so.
you know the Kirkbride art
almost.
that's Talos farewells the King of Atmora? Have you guys seen that? I somebody just linked it in chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
I can figure out how to get this onto this screen.
Big smug looking giant with Talos kind of floating up there.
Yeah.
Waving.
The giant has like crazy tusks coming off of his belt.
Yeah, all these weird, looks like tentacles almost. Yeah.
Tentacles in Atmora.
Wink, wink.
While you're figuring that out, I think that if they do have similar origins, we could look at points in Nordic history where their cultures may have deviated. For instance, when all of the Nords were cut down like to living only 6 years, and then they were separated by a mannish god. So that could possibly be where they deviated.
Well, that's kind of like a common thing for that sort of culture where the gods that you worship just decide to give you the smackdown just to remind you who's the king, you know, just to remind you who's actually in charge of this motherfucker. And then
it's really like after that that we see giants like being established as a separate thing.
That's right.
So I think that it's possible that, you know, when they were saved and given longer lifespans, possibly even given black souls, maybe that's when that happened.
That wasn't that the speculation at one point that the curse that men were under of only living 6 years was in fact that it was just a tale to use to explain the transition from giants to men.
I've never heard that theory, but
I don't know where I got that from.
Kind of makes sense.
Grain of salt. There's no actual research behind that one, but but you do get that a lot in a lot of myths where they're just you know, stories meant to explain why things happen. Like I was saying in a previous cast, I think 99% of all mythology comes because some parents got a really annoying kid and is just making shit up to shut him up, you know. So like. Major advances in culture were caused because kids won't leave you the fuck alone, and I think that a lot of
You sound like a person who has kids.
I do not.
I do.
On purpose.
I can attest to this.
Yeah. But that's I think that's kind of a typical thing in a lot of Western mythology, probably in a lot of Eastern mythologies. It's probably just mythology in general. I think it's probably safe to say that's a big part of why mythology exists, is to try to explain stuff. but it's not necessarily always the case. There's a lot of the various cultures that contributed to what we now call China. A lot of their what Westerners consider to be mythology is absolutely fiction, and the Chinese know this, but their behavior towards this fiction looks to us like religion. It's not necessarily the same thing, and it's kind of important to remember that like it's not necessarily true that like it is here in America, where we have major cultures that have canon, and they have the truth and lies, and you worship only the truth, or you go to hell, or some similar thing. There's a lot of cultures out there that have what we would consider to be fan fiction, but the way they behave towards it looks to us like religion, but it's not, or it is. I mean, it's just, you know, it's really hard to it's because I grew up my whole life under one version of Christianity or the other. It's very hard for me to think about religion as anything other than mandatory, like clearly defined canon.
It's religion in the sense that you can derive truths from it, but the truth isn't necessarily what events are written down.
Exactly.
I'm really sad that Ziegler isn't here to give his 2 cents on that. Like he would be all over this.
Yeah, yeah, he'd be very relevant right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Will we to vaguely?
So we've wandered. We've wandered around a lot of places.
Wanted to talk about. We haven't really talked about the Battle of Red Mountain at all, and I know that was.
Oh, geez. Are you talking about Shore, Son of Shore?
Also, there.
Does anybody know how to explain that story?
I mean, I know Todd does, and Todd is in the chat. I don't know if we want to get him in here, but I mean, we also haven't talked about Transkalpic world eating Nords.
Yeah,
which is a big thread. Yeah, I think there's some credence to that personally. Yeah, well, I mean, because I guess we're talking about it now.
Yes, absolutely.
So the idea, as I understand it, is that the Nords have a knack for leaping through Kalpas. So they avoid the end of the Kalpa and land in Tamriel in their spaceship that is High Hrothgar, where they leave Skyrim to go up to Atmora and come back as proper Nords of that Kalpa, or something like that. If we look at the 500 companions or thereabouts of Ysgramor, we see upon the return of the companions, they're turned into dragons, which kind of led me to the idea that, okay, well, when they hop Kalpas, do they become the dragons that we see in Skyrim? Are they the cause of the end of the Kalpa simply by...
Yeah, or is Alduin the Nords?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I had kind of played around with the idea with Evan Smith that Alduin could be the last Dragonborn from the previous Kalpa, but I get yelled at for that, and people.
I completely believe that. That's what I was saying earlier with Hermaeus Mora and all of that. That I think Hermaeus Mora and his association with Akatosh and Alduin is instrumental in making the Dragonborn, whatever Dragonborn, the Alduin.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, I mean, people yell at me for that, and they say, "Oh, well, Mirak is Mirak, however you want to pronounce his name. He's the last Dragonborn from the last Kalpa, because the Dragon Wars were in the Dawn era, the Merethic era, something like that. I'm pretty sure it's the Dawn, and the Dawn is actually the end of the previous Kalpa, not the beginning of the current one.
Other hypothesis? Mirak is the first Dragonborn, like he says he is.
No.
dragons are dragonborn that moved between Kalpas because how else would you escape time except to become a biological time machine?
Okay. Yeah, I did. I mean, the only thing, because in his dialogue, Mirak talks about how he was there when, for the Dragon Wars when Alduin was sent forward in time. He references those 3 heroes. I don't remember their names. One of them was voiced by Linda Carter. That's all I remember.
Gormley. Yeah.
Yeah, and he references them directly. Oh, they were fools or something like that.
I mean, I think he's just saying he's old.
Yeah. I mean, it could be that. But personally, I like the idea that the last Dragonborn of the previous Kalpa, who is only last because there were no Dragonborn to follow after him, he effectively failed in stopping Alduin, and in so became Alduin. So when we're faced with Alduin in Skyrim, it is in fact your Kalpic predecessor who you are fighting, and by leaping the Kalpas, he has become what he could have destroyed.
And then it even says when you do defeat Alduin at the end, it's just like, but he's not gone forever. Like super.
Oh yeah.
Which
Mhm.
I mean, I mean that kind of, I guess that kind of implies that there's more of a connection between it, because you don't absorb Alduin's soul,
Right.
And I'm not looking at chat right now, but I'm sure Todd is yelling about how.
Nah, he's gone.
Oh, is he? Okay. Well, landfall.
No, I mean
landfall
he's Todd's in there. That's what he said.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Landfall imminent because Alduin died. So that was, or I mean, and my argument to that is usually, well, just because the end of the Kalpa was delayed doesn't necessarily mean that he's dead. It could be delayed long enough for New Medium to show up,
Mm-hmm.
and then Alduin returning is irrelevant at that point.
Well, that's kind of like the key point here is that when you talk about what happens when, well, first off, I have to debate whether or not Alduin is a god or not. But I think it's probably we should not debate it at all, because it's pretty much a moot point to debate whether something is or is not a god in the Elder Scrolls universe, because the terminology is so, the definitions are so wildly disparate. But it's sort of like when you quote, air quotes, kill Alduin, the question is at that point, is he dead in the same way that Sothasil is dead? In the same way that Amalexia is dead? In the same way that Talos is dead? It's, if you pose the argument, which I think is very good, which is that you can't kill a god, however you define a god, then you could argue that Alduin has just dissipated or is no longer effective, is rendered ineffective, And that could be the closest you can get for a god, to death for a god, is you just don't matter anymore.
That works.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I wonder if his dissipating is his returning to, I guess, the fabric of the dream sleeve or something. Almost like a nirvana kind of thing. You become one with the universe and are removed from the cycle of reincarnation, which is, what a lot of these, a lot of the, I think. I know it's some sect of Buddhism. I'm not sure if it's all sects of Buddhism.
I'm not sure either. Yeah. Dr. Nightstone in chat has pointed out the question that a lot of people ask on various forums, which is the Alduin we see in Skyrim the same Alduin that eats and ends the Kalpa?
I would say why not? I mean,
well, if not,
like
where is
the
the real
or the
one?
one before?
You're saying that Alduin changes in each Kalpa.
I think I heard a cat.
I mean, I almost wonder if I mean, Alduin is kind of a title that gets passed between Kalpas. So let's say, we start in Kalpa A, right? Alduin comes to end or no, the Nords land on their new Kalpa and return as dragons, where they start to do their world-ending thing. The Nords of that Kalpa, who already existed, flee, land in the next Kalpa, where they arrive as dragons, where those Nords try to fight with the dragons, and so it's a cyclical thing. And Alduin being the Dragonborn of the Kalpa previous, he goes with the Nords, lands as Alduin to lead them in this thing. I don't know. I'm getting away from myself here a little bit.
I mean, I think that this is a good opportunity.
Welcome to the Selectives Lorecast.
Yeah,
A good opportunity for us to talk about the dragon cult, because the Nords weren't always fighting the dragons. So I think that it's possible that if the dragons are Nords from the previous Kalpa, like that whole arrangement started because they already had some level of knowledge and could guide the new Nords.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I almost need like a whiteboard or something.
The fighting kind of started though for in terms of the dragon cult. Basically started because the priests screwed everything up. As I understood it, that it wasn't that it was the dragons were basically off doing god type things, and the priests started levying taxes and stuff, or basically just mistreating everyone in Skyrim, which is what they weren't doing in Atmora. Apparently, they're apparently being nice and quite in adherence with their role. So I'm not sure the conflict is quite as Kalpic as it perhaps could be, because it doesn't feel like it's inevitable. It feels like a squabble over pay and conditions, basically.
Yeah, a conflict with management.
A conflict of what?
A conflict management issue with management.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just the people who were meant to kind of be the middle management screwed up and got far too big for their boots, and the CXOs just don't care.
That's the issue with middle management.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, just to change tack a bit, can we talk about the voice and its place in Nordic culture and stuff? Because just thinking back to the Children of the Sky, I read Children of the Sky and desperately wanted to be in Skyrim, and then it's like, oh, not everyone's doing this. And there's been kind of instances where people think all Nords shout, and then only a few do, or whatever. Tiber Septim tried to establish a college of the voice, if I remember rightly, once he'd conquered Skyrim. But what's sort of I just wanted to kind of go over the stuff about the voice and voices in general and its significance to Nordic culture, and perhaps is it dying in the fourth era at this point, and what does that mean?
Well, can all Nords shout? Because some Nords are invited to High Hrothgar to study the way of the voice and learn shouting and all of that, but can all of them do it?
Ooh. Yeah. Well, they need to get a proper student loan and just head up there.
Well, they just need to go back to school. I'm sorry, but that is unacceptable.
I just mean, like, is that an ability that they have specifically because of their veneration of Kine? Or because we don't see that in other cultures. Theoretically, other voices can or other races can, just because other races can be Dragonborn, but we don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it just a case of the knowledge dying out then, and it's part of a kind of a cultural shift among the Nords?
Hilti
Hilti
Earlybeard was a Shezarine, right? Hilti Earlybeard was a Shezarine, right?
Yes,
Yes, he was. Yes, I'm pretty sure all three of them were Shezarine.
If you go by MK's list, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
What thoughts were you going with that? With the Shezarine link. What's the kind of
not
thought
any
process?
direction I want to take anything.
Okay.
Things are getting fuzzy again whenever people start talking about what Dragonborn can or can't do. We inevitably end up with defining what is a Dragonborn, and that big long fucking conversation starts happening.
I mean, I don't just mean like can the Dragonborns do it, because like I mean we know like at least some of them can. I mean like Nords as a whole.
Oh, well,
like Nords have that ability.
We can assume that Dragonborn can, because the main character of Skyrim can do it no matter what race he is. But
yeah, that's what I was saying before.
We could also argue that a Dragonborn is a function of Nordic culture.
Sorry, I just had a thought linking back to some stuff that Jonathan posted on the Facebook group about Jurgen Windcaller being a wasted Nancy boy. That was...
Yeah, you hate Jurgen. Let's hear it.
It was that he basically screwed up by founding the Way of the Voice, because the Greybeards are pacifists.
Right.
They're really not a natural fit with the rest of Nordic culture. So they just basically no one wants to talk to the weird kids who don't want to kill everyone anymore. It was because the Way of the Voice was so culturally different to the rest of Skyrim, and it was one of the big places for to teach the voice, and one of the most successful, that elsewhere just kind of forgot it as they kind of shifted away. As the way of teaching the Thum kind of gravitated towards the Greybeards and didn't really stick anywhere else.
I mean, I think that it was just a case of, I mean, they are a very warlike people, as we discussed previously, and his defeat in battle, Jurgen, was so... I mean, he got his ass whooped so hard that he ran back to a mountain with his tail between his legs.
Really embarrassed, and is basically just kind of said, we should just not fight anybody ever anymore. It's just not worth it, you guys.
Like,
you guys, we don't need to... Yeah, we don't need to do this. That game's stupid anyway. I don't fucking... Whatever. I don't even,
Whatever.
I don't care, man. I'm not worried about it.
And can I just read out what Jonathan posted on the group?
Please do.
Because I think we kind of segueing onto that anyway. I think Windcaller was 100% wrong, and he failed the Nords and Nordic culture when he created the Greybeards. He was a leader, and his heart was crushed by losing his army. It could be said that he sacrificed his heart. He could have emulated Shaw, but instead he turned into a little bitch and hid on a mountain.
Well,
which I don't know. The way I was thinking of that, do we go with? Could it have been a potential myth echo there, but we're playing around with, or not? Or is that not a can of worms we want to open?
Well, I think that I'm very skeptical when it comes to the idea for Jurgen Windcaller to have started the pacifistic practice of learning Thum. It feels very my knee-jerk reaction to it is that it feels like a decision they made in order to create the ability for a story to happen, not a decision that not a world building exercise that was built out of logical progression of culture, So it was, in other words, it felt like a decision that the writers made to facilitate a scenario. They had a goal in mind and they wrote towards it. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing because it's the way I write. I am saying that it's a bad thing because it's the only way I write. And I'm not very good.
It has precedent in the lore, so
yeah, and that's what they wanted to do is they wanted to create a scenario where people could learn Thum without declaring an allegiance, basically, without saying by only saying I support Nords. They can learn Thum, and that statement is as neutral as saying I support America. That doesn't fucking mean
Right.
anything. You know, it's just, you know, you say that and then you do whatever the hell you want. And it's the Greybeards practicing Thu'um for what they called spiritual purposes smells suspiciously like a dragon cult to me. Because the Thu'um is a product of the dragons. And if it's not, then it has to be, then you would say that it's a product of Nordic culture. And if it's a product of Nordic culture, then it belongs to Nordic culture and not a bunch of graybeards sitting up in a cave somewhere.
Yeah.
Unless that is Nordic culture, to retire to the mountaintops and not meddle in the affairs of man. And if that's what Nordic culture is about, they're doing a real shit poor job of it.
Yeah.
No, it is really interesting that you say that, because as war ready as Nords are, they do hold the Greybeards in very high esteem.
Yeah.
It's considered a huge honor to be able to go to High Hrothgar and study with them. I mean, like, they only invite, like, like Ulfric went because he was rich, basically.
Yeah, I do, exactly, because he was born to the right family, and
yeah, right. So, like, it is considered honorable, but, like, they are pacifistic. So yeah, you're right. That doesn't really add up.
However, I would be, you know, doing our responsibility as lorebeards a disservice if I didn't figure out a way to lore it anyway. So the only conclusion that I can come to is the only thing that I can do at this point, or that I have done it in the past, is start drawing connections between other forms of fiction. And I inevitably end up with the cliche in Chinese wuxia fiction of a collection or a single tremendously badass warrior becoming dissatisfied with the material world and retiring to a mountaintop to study his kung fu in solitude, and then every once in a while deciding to teach a student.
I mean, I don't think we have to go to other works of fiction for that comparison. That happens other places in the Elder Scrolls universe.
Badass warriors retiring to the mountaintops?
I mean, or, you know, the top of a Dunmary ziggurat, like Vivek.
Yeah, or taking their magic and fucking off to a mushroom somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true.
I mean, because, you know, we have all of these accounts of, you know, Vivek, like, oh yeah, I stabbed that scrib for that farmer, or, you know, whatever. But really, all he does is he just, like,
levitates in his bedroom. Yeah,
they just, like, sat in a building and floated. So, you know. Occasionally being like, slave, I will teach you things as you wipe me down with a sponge.
and tend to manipulate.
Oil me and I shall teach you how to chim.
So maybe it's not that, because there is also a certain amount of dissatisfaction with how much the Greybeards don't do. So maybe it's just simply a case of Nords admire the Greybeards for their knowledge of the Thu'um, because they hold that in high regard. But that's the extent of it.
Which is a bit dissonant with how they treat Junal and knowledge in general. I mean, Hermaeus Mora gets more credit as a thing of knowledge than Junal does in Nordic culture.
That's true.
So is that a bizarre little anomaly simply because the Greybeards are a tangible thing that's always been there, or I don't know. That I hear that, and I'm not sure it makes sense.
Nords also consider the voice their gift.
Yeah,
like they consider themselves gifted with that, and that's how they got rid of the dragons in the first place.
Well, you know, and also the difference between Junal and Hermaeus Mora is marketing. Hermaeus Mora is the hot, sexy, forbidden knowledge. Junal's the old school girl next door shit. Man, I had that. Everybody knows how to you know, do Junal's shit. Junal's going to teach you how to, you know, how to pluck a chicken and how to build a fence and you know, how to hammer iron into a sword. Big fucking deal. Hermaeus Mora is going to teach you how to shoot tentacles out of your arms. That's my shit.
I think it's really interesting that throughout this discussion, we have been able to make the case for so many deities being so intertwined and just being two sides of the same coin.
I mean,
And that really ties into Skaal culture.
yeah, with the
Ooh.
the all maker.
Oh shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Allfather, yeah.
Yeah. It's
Shit. Did we ever get an actual like Bethesda source for who the Skalds were worshiping?
I've heard
I
it.
mean, the lawmaker, but
I've heard it described as Anu himself.
Hmm.
But I've also seen pretty convincing arguments as to why it should be Shore.
I mean, I don't think it should just be Anu because they also look at hardships that they encounter and they just take it as they go. So maybe just some sort of combination of Anu and Padme.
Yeah.
well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That arguably Shore, father of Shore, or Sithis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember vaguely, and that does go back to, now you say that Shore, son of Shore. There's some bits about Shore, father of Shore. I can't remember exactly where. That does sound suspiciously like he's a gradient up, at least.
Yeah, that's the impression I got.
Yeah, it's not kind of different Kalpa versions sort of thing. It's a very, very different. It's a kind of a difference in nature almost. But yeah, again, I don't really know enough about Skaal culture to really comment on that one.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. When did the Skaal deviate from the Nords? Because they still worship, like, I mean, you know, the Allmaker, but they do still have all of this imagery of animal totems and like very like tied to, you know, the earth sort of vibe.
I'm gonna guess that it has something to do with the War of the First Council.
Okay.
Because that's far enough back where we can start to see, you know, I mean, how many years has it been? Thousands of years since Nerevar and the Red moment, right? And so I mean, given that amount of time, two distinctly separate peoples can deviate in different directions, in terms of their worldview and ideology and all that. So I mean, if I was going to attribute any time when they made that distinction, I would think that's where it started. Would be
yes, and I've just found a passage within the 5 songs that not only seems to confirm that theory, but would also mean that Wulfarth was the founder of the Allmaker religion almost. We've got the in the secret song, you've got the passage of and many Nords could not bring themselves to ally with their traditional enemies, even in the face of Red Mountain. They were close to desertion. Then Wulfarth said, "Don't you see where you really are?" Which is in the Red moment, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Don't you know who Shore really is? Don't you know what this war is? And they looked from the king to the gods, the devils and the orcs, and some knew, really knew, and they are the ones who stayed. In the context of, if they are in the Dragonbreak at that point, that if they are in the Dawn, then you can say, well, have they seen right the way up gradients to Anu? And are understanding what the Kalpic cycle is. But I mean, I don't think we have any indications of them processing Kalpas in Skaal culture, which is a point against it maybe. But if we think about the Skaal as the ones who stayed in that scenario, we have a reason for them thinking that.
I'm trying to think of the Skaal idea of Kalpas, and I mean, I find myself returning back to Hermaeus Mora. Because Hermaeus Mora is effectively the devil, with as far as the Skaal are concerned.
Yep.
And so, I mean, if we take into account what we've kind of discussed about Hermaeus Mora's role compared to the Akatusk, then maybe it's knowledge they're actively resisting, if we look at Hermaeus Mora as an interpretation of forbidden knowledge in general,
Mhm.
and this knowledge, because it's demonized, forbidden, there are things you should not know, then maybe they have an idea that such a thing exists, but they don't talk about it. Nope, that's forbidden knowledge. Nope, we're not touching it. Nope.
At the same time, we do also know, though, that they have knowledge that Hermaeus Mora does not have.
Yeah, true.
What could be the nature of that knowledge?
Yeah, I don't remember if that's expanded in.
That would also give them a
Dragonborn.
reason, Hermaeus Mora, a reason to be a devil figure for them, because he would probably be trying to get it out of them all the time.
Well, he's the greedy man.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he is.
Of course he would. Yeah.
It might not even be knowledge that's particularly mind blowing.
It's like
He
how
is the
to.
actual correct way to pluck a chicken.
You know, we
How
know
to weave
just
a
where to get a
basket
chicken so that
underwater.
you can take its head off and it doesn't run around all over the place.
Yeah.
Hermaeus Mora's like, that's dank shit. I gotta have a piece of that.
I had no idea you could make clam chowder this way.
Oh dear.
Teach me how to keep my souffle from drooping in the middle.
We
Plays
get
are
into the
important shit. That's
we get into the realm of Hung,
Yeah.
the Daedric Prince of Minor Conveniences.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and for those of you who do not know the joy of the nupple, then good.
The bristly lore cactus.
Yes. Yeah. The spider that's been squished by a whoopee cushion. Okay. Before we run right off the rails.
Yeah, we have.
I'm sorry.
To bring us back on, can I talk about the Battle of Red Mountain and something that I've seen in various places? Some people think there are 2 battles of Red Mountain, thanks to TS5, which I'm not convinced on, because you have the Battle of Red Mountain where the tribunal happened and the Dwemer disappeared and all that stuff, but you look at the tablets on High Hrothgar, and Jurgen went to Red Mountain. And or Jurgen, however you want to pronounce it. I'm going German rather than Scandinavian.
Sure.
Jurgen.
But Jurgen was there and kind of went back. That's where the tongues were beaten, and so he went up to his mountain, up to his other mountain. He got beaten at Red Mountain, which kind of makes me think. Has made some people think that have there been 2 battles at Red Mountain, and
In the 36 lessons, that I think that skirmish is referred to as just the war with the Northern men.
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I think that it's possible that maybe that war there was a final battle that happened at Red Mountain or nearby it, and that's why it's referred to like that. But
yeah, because the red moment and the war at Red Mountain, those aren't the entire. That isn't all that happens. It's like, hey, let's go to Red Mountain and fuck some shit up. Like it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Because wars are so huge with rippling effects. You got battles over here and battles over there and battles back that way. And so, I mean, Jurgen Windcaller doesn't necessarily need to be at Red Mountain to get his ass kicked by the Dwemer Chimer Alliance. You know.
Yeah.
And that's before the Dwemer and Chimer were like, oh, yeah, the Dwemer are building a big thing, and we don't like that. Let's stop them.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that seems to me like an end stage. Like, they were buddies for a while, and then you fiend, and then that's where we get the final battle with.
But it does explicitly say on the tablets, Red Mountain.
Does it? Okay. I mean, that could be a synecdoche where it's using Red Mountain in place of all of Morrowind or Resdane.
Oh,
possibly.
The land of Red Mountain.
Yeah.
But I mean, I that's up for debate, I suppose.
Yeah, because it strikes me as that particular war was part of the or was at least contemporaneous with the War of Succession when the Nords lost Morrowind, which happened 300 years before the Dragonbreak battle, which I don't know quite how to read that, was to were there two battles there. Were we actually looking at Jurgen being at there in the 700th year of the First Era, or what? But yeah.
I mean, do we have like a death date for Jurgen Windcaller? I don't know if it's
I don't think we do.
I don't know if it's mentioned like in his tomb, or if it's because I know if you run through like Windhelm, there's a lot of almost like plaques like venerating
on the wall,
people. Yeah, and I mean they're really hard to read.
Because the texture is a little.
We have that,
but I don't think that there are two of them.
No, we do. According to the UESP, there is a stone etching in Windhelm which places. Oh no, that's Wolfarth. Sorry,
oh, damn it.
That's
okay.
Wolfarth.
I was like fist pumping in triumph there, and,
and we let you down. Why is there Daedric on Jurgen Windcaller's tomb? Is there?
Yes, I believe there is.
And Daedric?
Yeah.
Why is what is it? What does it say?
Well, I think it's graffiti, if I recall. It's someone etched something onto his tomb.
Fonduit Hen was here.
Yeah, he taught Jurgen a few motions, if you know what I'm saying.
Vivek takes it up the butt. What does it say?
Let me look it up here.
Yeah.
Daedric letters written on Jurgen Windcaller's coffin. I was playing through the main quest.
Yes, they are. Looks like an O to start off with.
It literally just says Windcaller in Daedric.
Oh yeah, it does.
So I don't know what the implications are there, because why would it be in Daedric and not in Daedric or in Dragon script?
And not Dragon script.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I mean, I remember I've seen this before, and I thought I remembered it as like graffiti, like just kind of someone etched it into the top or whatever.
Shit.
The only thing that I can think of is, was there some cultural cross-pollination there with some Morrowind stuff bleeding back into Skyrim?
Yeah, maybe, because I mean we know that Daedric is used as the Dunmerus alphabet.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe that right there makes the case that other races do naturally possess the ability to use the Thu'um if they attempt it, because maybe it's possible that some, not Nordic monk who was with the Greybeards made that pilgrimage.
So I'm gonna
like, okay, I want other people to be able to know what this is too. I'm just gonna write this here.
I'm gonna posit some heresy. I got some heresy here, and I know we like heresy. What if Jurgen Windcaller was either a Dunmer himself or a hybrid of Nord and Dunmer?
Well, I mean, maybe it's
folks, thanks for tuning in to the Selectives Lorecast. That's gonna get we're gonna end it for today before we get into deeper shit.
That at that battle that whipped him so soundly, they picked up some remnant of.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, the reason I suggest a crossbreed kind of thing there is maybe there's more to Jurgen Windcaller's defeat than we really know about. That there's some cultural issue going on in Jurgen Windcaller as a a microcosm of the struggle between the two races, as almost like the union of a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, right? So, we've got like a Nord father, or I guess it would be we don't really know what Jurgen Windcaller looked like, mother. But so Nord mother and Dunmer father. and he's got these two cultures that are part of his heritage. And when it comes time to fight, it's like, okay, do I hesitate? What happens here? And I mean, I don't know. I'm really just kind of spitballing here.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. And I mean, maybe he got a Chimer girlfriend or something.
Yeah, something. Oh,
I mean, maybe he turned
I keep saying
to
Denver.
peace before the war ended. Like maybe he was like, no, this should be a peacekeeping mission, and that's why he ran off and tried to make this whole peacekeeping cult.
Maybe, and then got his ass kicked and was like, well, I don't want to fight. Let's not fight.
Yeah, I don't want to lose, so I'm not going to fight.
Yeah.
Which, actually, just rewinding entirely on that, that's a rejection of the "you must die in battle" credence entirely. Do greybeards go to Sovngarde? How do they process that?
Yeah, they actually, when you go to Sovngarde at the end of, the main quest in Skyrim, you see Jurgen there.
Yeah.
I do. Okay.
Yeah. How did he get there, though?
The others. I mean, I assume he died at some point.
Well, yeah.
Or he walked his ass in there just like the Dragonborn did. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But
it is on the moon. Like I mean, shit.
As ever,
the Hordador's been there. So.
As ever, though, it's the kind of the greybeard anomaly in so many ways as compared to the rest of Nordic culture. It just feels weird.
I mean,
just I think about it.
Just because the Nords ascribe battle to as the way to get into Sovngarde, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're 100% correct,
or that it's the only way.
I mean,
actually, that's true because there's some text somewhere about Sovngarde that says that there's actually a way to find your way there. It kind of almost pictures it like a quest for the Holy Grail. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's kind of you can find your way to Sovngarde. Not hardly anyone makes it. It's a harrowing journey. Those that you can find again afterwards come back forever changed, etc. Or that even the ones that didn't make it. So it implies that it's perhaps a place that you could make your way to, I suppose.
What is the method through which Alduin is able to travel there and back?
Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Well, I think originally it was because dragons can move from Nirn to space, which they talk about in a piece of text in Battlespire, where the general of the Imperial division that works in Battlespire has a dragon associate who he uses to fly between Battlespire and Nirn. So originally, as everybody knows, the Sovngarde was supposed to be on the moon, and so the thinking would be at that point that Alduin literally flew to literally flew to the moon to recuperate, I think was what they suggested.
In game, we see that represented as a portal.
Yeah.
Of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I turned my green screen off. It was messing around with the back of your with your wall behind you. So.
Sorry.
At least it wasn't messing with my shirt this time.
Not this time. Yeah. So I think. Do you actually see Alduin leave when you whoop his ass the first time? Does he vanish into a portal?
The first time?
He just flies away, I thought. Yeah.
He's like,
but it's implied in the game that he flies back to
Sovngarde.
I forget what it's called. Is it called Oralhost? No, that's not the one. Whatever that temple is called that you go to at the end, it's implied that he flies back to his portal that is there.
Yeah, he flies back to that facility or whatever it was, that castle. I can't remember what it was. And
I can't remember what it was named.
I keep
flies
into the portal. Starfall, but that's not right.
Yeah, that sounds right. I think that's what they imply. But I mean, they don't really. I mean, I don't recall them. I think I don't recall them saying one way or the other, whether he flew back to Sovngarde or if he flew back to that location.
Skulldolphin.
Skulldolphin.
Because,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, your player character is basically like, well, how did Alduin get there? And then the dragon's like, I'll show you.
Oh, yeah. Right. You got it. That's right. I'll show you how he got there. And then he flies your ass over there and goes, you jumped into that swirly toilet-looking thing. And that's what you do. Well, that's one way to get there, I guess. Yeah,
And I mean,
Weirgate.
it's not the only time that we see portals to other places, even if you can technically reach them, like, directly. I mean, we have portals to Oblivion, we have portals to the Soul Cairn, whatever that is.
Yeah. So,
Have we exhausted Nord stuff?
I vaguely wanted to. Well, I was thinking vaguely about things a bit more earthbound, and things like the moot and how that works. But that's more kind of exposition rather than discussion at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're pretty much. Well, I can't think of much else at this stage.
No, not really. We went longer than I thought we would, to be honest with you.
We can always do part two when we think of more.
Well, that's how these things always work, is that after we stop this, somebody else pops in on the Facebook and goes, I can't believe you didn't talk about this. And we go, son of a bitch. And then, yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, what are we wanting to talk about next time?
Pick another culture, if you ask me.
I mean,
We can do the Nibinians.
Nibinians would be cool.
I would really like to spend some time talking about the various shards of Cyrodiilic culture in general.
Yeah.
I think that would be really good, because I do want to spend a lot of time talking about when some were popular and when some weren't, and where their influences come from, and so on.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about Bretons, Reg.
I would like to see, not necessarily in the next cast, but sometime soon, I'd like to discuss Red Guards. Oh yeah. I mean, we gotta get Felix. We gotta get Felix in on that, because that is probably one of the areas that I'm weakest, in terms of different cultures. Like, I know virtually nothing about Indians, or high elves for that matter. But Somerset's coming, so we'll see.
Reg is talking about Slodes.
Oh, okay, all right. I got slowed for days.
I would rather. Yes, I'm sorry.
Maybe we could just maybe plan on talking about Cyrodiilic cultures next time, since they bleed into other cultures so much, and then after that we could decide.
Solid.
Yeah, Kothringi, Necken. Yeah, that's a very good point. It would be nice to talk about Slodes around or near the Somerset Isles release.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Because I think it would be nice for us to sort of parse some information that we're getting from the alpha, or I think they're alpha servers, whatever. The closed beta, I think that's going on right now.
Yeah.
So we could.
Not that we could talk about it.
Oh, we could just talk about the main quest stuff.
Can we talk about? That's a good question. I don't know if we can talk about stuff that we get on.
The NDA
content down that was posted.
The NDA mentions only stuff like past the first quest in the main storyline. Which I haven't done much of anyway. I've been more interested in the Stygics, but
it's up May 1st. Ooh, hello. Okay, something to think about. I'll take a look at the NDA, because I was also trying to figure out a way to stream it. I don't think I'm going to be able to. But
by the time of our next cast, if we're going every other week, that'll be up anyway.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So,
the Stygic Order? Yeah, that's another thing we need to talk about. Yeah, don't get me started, Dark.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So that's going to do it. I've been putting off thanking all the people who followed and subbed, so I'm going to do that now. The first person's name is unpronounceable. So thank you for your Tier 1 subscription. Reg 55,000, thank you very much for your Twitch Prime subscription. Thalmor Justicar, thank you for your Twitch Prime subscription. Valen Dregoth, thanks for the follow. NE1 and a whole bunch of numbers, thank you for following. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the House of We. We will see you guys for another Selectives Lorecast in 2 weeks. And that's all I got to say about that. Everybody wave goodbye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.